I've talked to a lot of people at like Meta, Netflix, Google, Shopify, where after reaching like, let's say 50 million monthly customers, he wanted to start leveraging actually its scale.
Before starting the episode, a word from our sponsor.
In a monolith, one broken feature can halt the releases for every feature. Micro-Frontends allow teams to move independently and ship features quickly, but coordinating deploys for all those new apps, that's usually where things slow down. In fast-moving teams, especially with shared staging environments or large Next.js monorepos, coordinating releases across apps can get messy. Vercel's micro-frontend support makes it easy to break up your front end without you having to worry about coordination between different applications. Route control, deployments, and observability are all built in, so teams can ship independently without worrying about breaking someone else's release. To see how it works, visit vercel.com/microfrontends. And later in this episode, we'll dig into how teams are simplifying Next.js monorepos by leaning into micro-frontends on Vercel.
Hi everyone and welcome to the second season of Micro-Frontends in the Trenches. My name is Luca, I'm your host. So today I'm here with Jeremy, who was the lead platform engineer in Zalando. If you don't know Zalando, Zalando is a fashion e-commerce based in Germany that is very well known and especially made a huge milestone in the Micro-Frontends community, creating one of the first implementation of Micro-Frontends at scale that I have seen. I remember vividly back in the days when I saw a talk of Zalando in a conference, and I remained astonished of the idea of taking a monolith and breaking it apart on the front end, and basically was foundational for me for then writing my book and all the other activities I've done with Micro-Frontends. So without further ado, welcome, Jeremy. How are you?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited. It's an honor. I mean, you have had such wonderful guests the whole 2024. And here's going to be interesting because I'm going to tell you that what we did with Tailor, I think we went a bit back on it. But yeah, I'll wait for that until we dive a bit into the podcast today.
Absolutely. So first of all, as every time, we ask our guests to introduce themselves. So tell us a bit about what you're doing now, considering that you left Zalando recently, and also it would be interesting to understand your first approach with Micro-Frontends.
Yeah, so I'm Jeremy, coming from France. I live in Berlin now for a while. So now what I'm doing, I'm starting my own company in the front-end productivity space because I've seen how much of an impact we had at Zalando. And yeah, so it's actually funny, also the first time I stumbled into micro-frontends was actually with Tailor, right? So you mentioned this massive impact that it had. And for me, the impact that really it had is when a recruiter reached out to me and saying, oh, we were hiring front-end developers at Zalando. I already knew who Zalando was. There's this big advertising on the brand, but also knew a lot about their engineering. And so for me, when they said, oh, we need people to work on the let's say, front-end platform, I was super excited. And actually, I was super excited to even work on Tailor because, Tailor had this massive impact inside the company as well.
Absolutely. Can you explain for all our listeners what Tailor is and how it fit into the Micro-Frontend story?
Yeah. So actually, even before diving into what Tailor is, I will mention also the context of how Tailor was born. So it's a bit before I even joined Zalando, but I got a lot of context as soon as I joined. So at the time, the company had a tech strategy of what they called radical agility. And it was strategy, more like organizational strategy with a super strong emphasis on complete team autonomy, right? Where teams would own topics completely end to end. And then you can quickly see how maybe micro-frontends could really support that, right? And so on the front-end side of things, they decided to start building some technology that would actually support these teams end to end. And that's actually how Tailor was born. So when you take this website, as you mentioned earlier, the idea was to try to split it into things that kind of make sense and that team could own end to end. And we had things like more like navigational components, like the header, where we had a lot of links that were also very dynamic. Maybe the footer was a bit more static, but was also part of the navigational elements. And for example, these were the first, let's say, micro-frontends. And then there were also other parts, like even the content on the homepage was kind of a micro-frontend. The content on the product detail page was a micro-frontend. And then you can see these things were kind of pieced together. So in a sense, every part of the website was kind of like, that's why also Tailor was also, the whole infrastructure on Tailor was called Mosaic, because it was made of these fragments, right? So the header was a fragment of the page, and then Tailor was a server-side composed micro-frontend framework where we had all these teams that would basically receive these requests saying, okay, I need the header, I need the homepage fragment, and then Tailor would stitch things together and then send back the complete pieces of Mosaic back to the browser, to the customer to see.
And out of curiosity, how many people were working on this project in Zalando?
So on Tailor itself, the framework, yeah, actually it's not a lot of people because Tailor was actually a very thin layer. I think it was like a team of 2 to 3 engineers. And so it was a relatively small, let's say, but also the code for Tailor, because it was just, let's say, this composition layer, right, on the server. It was not like very, very heavy framework. So that's why there was not a lot of surface.
Perfect. And overall, the company, how many developers were, let's say, creating these fragments for then composing that? So we were talking about tens, hundreds.
No, so I think when I joined, I think we were around like 50 to 60 people working on this macro front-end architecture.
Oh, nice. That's very, very cool to hear. And you were distributed, or you were co-located, considering it was pre-pandemic, and therefore
Yeah,
probably.
so because of pre-pandemic, most people were actually in the Berlin Tech Hub.
Nice. So when I talk about fragments, I think we need to specify what kind of fragments. So what was the output of a micro-frontend, or basically a service that was serving a fragment? Because in reality, everything was happening on the server side, right?
Yeah. So in the end, it's pretty simple. That a fragment was just returning a piece of HTML, which is already server-side rendered. So you can just imagine like a large piece of HTML, and alongside they were also returning the assets needed to basically be interactive and also to do the styling, right? So it was just a reply of a fragment back to Tailor was just like HTML, JS assets, CSS asset. It's like almost as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tailor was able to compose based on these responses and also streaming back the responses to the browser.
And the interesting part, if I remember well, because I spent a bit of time studying what Zalando was doing at the beginning, and then also we touch also later on the evolution of Tailor. But one thing that you were doing is in the first implementation of Tailor, you allowed to have a multi-framework approach. Is it correct?
Yeah, that's correct. However, in practice, I think this is what was kind of discouraged, and I think that's also something that you mentioned in some episode, because we are e-commerce. Performance matters. Conversion is like proper, is like as a correlation to how fast the content is displayed for the customers, and you don't want to pay the price of having multiple frameworks. So at Zalando at the time, and still now, I think we bet on React, and so basically they were also part of this optimization, because this was a lot of time even before there's like, for example, things like module federation. So for example, we also had like a basic set of assets that micro-frontend didn't need to declare. For example, React DOM. So you don't want to pay the price for these libraries multiple times, even without all the fanciness that we have nowadays.
And out of curiosity, what are the main challenges that you face in implementing, and pioneering something like that? Because back in the days, and we're talking probably before the term micro-frontends was created, so before 2016, you were already working on this. And I'm curious to understand, without any literature, without many, let's say, references online, how you were handling this situation.
Yeah, so to be fair, like I don't have a lot of context, because actually I joined just, let's say, like after, let's say, the Tailor era, or like at the end of the Tailor era. But what I remember is that, yeah, they were like a team of very experienced front-end engineers. And actually, like, but for them, that was really like, that was almost their life work, as you mentioned. It's like, because it was also like something that they really, yeah, they really had to do a lot of, like, let's say, research. But there were also things, I think, remember there were some a lot of inspirations for Tailor is also from this Facebook Big Pipe, right? So basically where you have like part of the page with kind of placeholders. So it was not entirely from scratch that the team did things, but yeah, there were like, I remember a lot of inspirations for things like that. And also, even though it's different, like there are also some inspiration for server-side includes a bit, like some ideas there as well.
Totally. I think the transclusion mechanism that you applied on Tailor is coming straight from edge side includes, because at the end of the day, ESI was mastering transclusion client and server side or CDN side. But the developer experience was great. I remember, though, in that talk that I was mentioning in the beginning, you also spent time creating a nice developer experience. Because I remember there was a CLI that you can spin up. I think back in the days they were called micro apps or something like that, for accelerating the let's say developer experience for developers.
Yeah. So, but actually, that's also something that in the long term, like I would say, like as let's say downside. So because and now we start to talk slowly about let's say why we moved away from Tailor, but it's easy to get started always, right? So I see a lot of mini companies also like, we have a new boilerplate for front end, but creating the new front end with the new boilerplate is not the problem. The problem is updating maybe 20 or 80 repositories to the latest version of Node.js, of TypeScript, etc. So I mean, yeah, they were good developer experience, and they were also like, even though these teams were independent, they also try to share some things as well, like of course. But it was never, let's say, I think like kind of like the centerpiece of really like the most of the bulk of the work or like the impact of Tailor. It was really having these super like independent teams, like the fact that teams were able to experiment very fast and iterate very fast. Like they had this end-to-end ownership of topics or domain, right? So the product could say, we want to experiment with shipping this new experience, and they can go live very fast because they don't need to align with all the world, right? So that was where like really Tailor really shine in relation to this radical agility, where really at the time when Zalando went through super hyper growth, it was actually the best framework at the time, like because it allowed this huge speed for teams to basically match what the business was requiring or wanted at the time.
I want to spend like a couple of minutes on this aspect of micro-frontends. The fact that when you are building that, you are trying to reach autonomy and independence and ownership and the proper distributed system, like you would do with microservices. Because very often, I talk with customers and other developers that are thinking about micro-frontends for reusability, where reuse is form of coupling. So therefore, we need to find the right balance between those dimensions. So I think it's important to highlight this part. And how do you identify what were the fragments of your application? I think is another important topic to look at. There was like you were looking at some metric. It was data driven or completely gut feelings. Just interested on that.
So I think at the time it was more around again, like more like really the domain of like where the product could make an end-to-end choice, right? So that's what I mentioned. But it was also not really like just not UI, right? So for example, the team that was responsible for the header fragment, which all these links and navigation, was also responsible for the catalog fragment, because in the end they were kind of like closely related, and some of these links you could access. So I think it was really more around, let's say, the capabilities, and the same for the product, right? So we had this product detail page. Of course, like there are so many things around it that like, okay, that was enough to create a macro front end. I think that was more where we could give product autonomy, where we created a kind of a macro front end. So it was like more product driven decision.
Okay, so we have briefly mentioned Tailor, but obviously there was an evolution at some point, because I remember I was starting to do my first few talks about micro-frontends, pitching about Tailor, and then suddenly I found like a blog post where you move from Tailor to a more React-driven framework that basically was leveraging, if I remember well, GraphQL, as well for, let's say, as a layer for exposing a backend for frontend to retrieve all the information needed. Can you tell us a bit more what were the motivation of this choice? And let's say, and I think here is where you start to have, let's say, more impact inside Zalando.
Yeah, and this is going to be more like, it's interesting for me because so that's when I joined Zalando, where I actually thought I was about to evolve Tailor, right? Because that's what Zalando was using. But I was told, oh, now we need to build, let's say, a new version of Tailor, which is not Tailor. I was like a bit confused, and also like I was not disappointed, but like I really like Tailor as a concept, as you mentioned as well. Like it's like very clean, very pure architecture. So I was like, it was quite interesting, and this is where I spent like a lot of time then. And as I said, like I think I want to reiterate, like Tailor was a massive success, and I think like it helped the company grow a lot. But now, like actually, when I joined was like 6.5 years ago, the company was entering a different stage, where after reaching like let's say 50 million monthly customers, it wanted to start leveraging actually its scale and bring a more, let's say, end-to-end experience that's also more engaging. Because the problem you have with Micro-Frontend, especially for like very, let's say, customer-driven website like Zalando, is that at some point for us, because we also had like a lot of time, right, with these like different fragments, the website started to feel like it was developed by different teams, which it was, but it started to leak a bit to the UI. And even though you have like, of course, a strong design system, when you have designers or teams working in complete autonomy, it somehow starts to leak a bit. But that was not the main thing. I think there was a couple of other points. At some point, also, the company, we wanted to enter a thing where we would do more dynamic page composition. It's more about displaying very personalized, relevant content to our customers. And we found that it would be hard to do this with Tailor. I mean, at least Tailor was not built for that, or it would have meant that every micro-frontend would need to build this personalization capability, and it was very hard to reuse pieces there. And then there were like two things that are also very important. And due to how Tailor worked, even though, as you mentioned, it was maybe easy to kick off a service, it meant that every team had to own the end-to-end operation on the front end, right? So it means developer experience, maintenance of dependencies, security, CI/CD, DevOps. And when you start with like 3-4 teams, maybe it's okay. But when you reach maybe 10 teams, 12 teams, it starts to be a lot of like, let's say, duplicated infrastructure effort. And the last bit, which was also very, very important, is that it was very hard for small things, or for projects to operate in this manner. Let's say you want to change a bit your loyalty system, or you want to add, let's say, a new language for different markets. You have to either align all these teams and make them like work. And of course, they have their own roadmap and they are working at their own pace. I mean, that was radical agility. But also, even if you create, let's say, a project team, you will need to then go to these different teams, maybe 20 different teams, and then they have to learn 20 different repositories, 20 different ways of working, even though, of course, the same company, a lot of things are aligned, but still 20 different places where you have to go and make your changes and synchronize across. Right. So this is where actually for us, like at the time, we were like, okay, it doesn't work for our scale, or at least for what we want to do in the next stage. So it's time to replatform, basically.
You transition from independent teams that can, let's say, have skin on the game, that decide whatever they need to do. There are some, let's say, API at the end that the output basically has to be an HTML fragment, a layer that is composing everything that was Tailor.js. Now suddenly you realize, okay, so we start to scale even further. So now we need to implement a proper platform engineering team.
Yes, and then this is where it gets interesting, because we still really, really like a lot of this concept of the micro frontend, right? So we still really like the fact that, I think I like on the video you mentioned that they are like context aware, but they just know the idea of a product, right? So actually we really like this concept and we wanted to keep it. We also really like the fact that, like they can be isolated as much as possible while being, like, as I said again already, aware of the context. So this we wanted to keep, but the main thing that we wanted to tackle is that first we wanted to reduce the duplicated infrastructure effort, but we also wanted to make it super easy for teams to basically ship front-end experiences across different domains, right? And we wanted to provide this golden paths. And this is where you mentioned this concept of platform. So this is where the idea of this interface framework came in. And now, maybe you already know, but like otherwise, gonna maybe a bit blow your mind. We completely shifted around the concept of a micro front-end. And to start, there is an easy example. When you open our website, on almost every single page, you see this thing called a product card. It's like just like an image of the product, maybe like the brand, the title of the product, and its price. And these are on every single page, like the home page where you have these carousels, and the catalog page, obviously, but also on the recommendations, the product detail page, and many other pages. And for us, we wanted to be able to reuse that component, right? Or like, I mean, no, it's not a component anymore, like in the interface framework, but we wanted to reuse this, but we didn't want teams to have to declare how it works, how it renders, how it gets its data. So for us, for example, this became our first, let's say, new macro front end. And the way it works, actually, you mentioned like GraphQL, is that this, let's say, micro front end, actually, we call them now renderers, because they are part of the page that can render in isolation and can also render nested. But it just took an idea of a product, and then it had its own GraphQL query, and then simply attached to the GraphQL query, there's only two components, the query, and then the React components used to render. So as you said, we were also still heavily betting on React, but it's not even at the core of the framework. It's still more like a rendering library. But then that's it. So the renderer, what people now use to declare, let's say, this macro front end, or in this example, this product card, is just a GraphQL query describing what I need which data I need to render my card, and then the visual representation with a React component. And that's it. That's like the basic layer of the framework.
In this case, basically, you are switching from I do everything server-side rendered to I have React that was rendered on the client side, or still
No, so it's still all very heavily server side. And now, so we move from like a very heavy, let's say, very thin Tailor framework to this interface framework, which was super heavy, and that was doing all the heavy lifting for this, let's say, renderers. So we were basically, what happens when we render a page, we have a set of rules to see what are the macro frontends which will be present, or which renderers will be on the page. Then we collect all the GraphQL queries. We do a batch API call to our like front-end server. Yeah. Then on the server side, still we server-side render everything, and then we render the markup and iterate on the client side. So for us, it was very important to keep also this server-side rendering. And that's why, I mean, it's not React first or React heavy. It's because the framework does all this work, and it's not React that does it.
And therefore, on the routing part, that is interesting. So if I go to a specific product page, what was the path on that side? So you basically probably hit the CDN, and then from there you go into the region, and in the region you start to do this orchestration, I guess. So you have like a sort of reverse proxy, something like that?
Yeah, so actually Zalando has its own reverse proxy called Skipper. And actually, that's where we basically like prepare for the front-end server, let's say, the context of the page, right? So for example, if you go to a product page, it will already give us, okay, this is a product page and this is the ID. And then the front-end server will already know
how to do that. Okay, so basically you are just redirecting the request to the front-end server. The front-end server was composing with different React parts, and their related queries, the page and the server-side rendered everything and shipped into the client.
For people that want to dive deeper, there's like a little bit of articles in the Zalando engineering blog about interface framework and how that works, because it's a lot to talk about now, like in a podcast.
Yes, absolutely. I will share the link in the description of the video so everyone can deep dive on that. And currently still, let's say, used by Zalando before you left, or?
Yeah, we migrated like 100% of the website to this framework, and right now it's like it really helped us like massively with speed, especially for this cross-cutting project that I was talking about. We recently also added like English support to more markets, and before it would have been a nightmare to do it in all the, let's say, macro front-ends or like fragments, and now only actually the platform team had to do the change, and then everybody benefited from it. So there's like a lot of like scale, like economies of scale effects with this.
Before we continue with our episode, let's take a break.
If you're using Next.js in a monorepo or just managing multiple front-end apps, Vercel's micro-frontend support can make life way easier. Once your micro-frontends are deployed on Vercel, they can all join a single micro-frontends group. This group defines a central entry point, directs route paths and components to individual Vercel projects, and offers simple configuration with built-in observability to manage your architecture. This means you no longer need to wrangle infrastructure. Your teams don't need to manually track URLs or write and then rewrite middleware handlers. All of this is handled as a first-class product feature in Vercel. Many micro frontends are treated as one. If you're ready to scale your developer velocity, check out vercel.com/microfrontends.
The interesting part of this second phase is that when you reach the maturity and you started to understand what was working, what wasn't working, the fact that you started to gather the architecture characteristics that you wanted to see in the new system, but more importantly, creating guardrails that enables developers to speed up the development is the key takeaway probably in this case. That is something that they have seen over and over again on front end, back end, stuff like that. You reach at the beginning, you have this idea of diverging and started to have teams that are learning the right balance that they need to take, and then you start to converge into a platform team, and then create this idea of okay, so now we know how to express what we need to do and what are the benefits and balance approach. Because I think at the beginning, striking a balance on the guardrails is very, very difficult, because you have like an idea how it would look like, but you didn't test in production. You didn't see in reality where friction will arise. And I think you did a very good job on deciding, okay, so let's re-envision our platform and create something that accelerate and express the business agility that is required for a second phase for after the massive growth that you have.
And I really like what you mentioned about guardrails, because actually I also like, I think it's like a talk that you shared like from Sarah Wells about platform. It's about enabling teams. And I think from the start, we also try to keep this in mind. And I'm like, for example, like just to start with the outcome, but like at the end, teams were able to, even in this, let's say, more centralized setup, teams were able to have like still complete autonomy. What I mean by that is that the team can go to the framework, they can make a change, get their like a colleague review it, approve it, and then it automatically gets deployed to production end to end without any intervention. And I think this is part thanks of also like a lot of guardrails that, because you are now a platform, you're able to put in place a lot of test automation, etc. But that was also very important from like the end-to-end experience, even when you start to centralize, to provide something that still massively enables team, because that's still the goal, right? Like you're just an enablement team.
I think it's extremely important to stress out that a platform team is an enablement team for developers, because very often there is this virtual chasm between platform engineering and developers that basically create more arms than solutions. And it's a shame, because the answer is literally communicate more and trying to understand what's happening in the trenches in order to support them. So I think it's very important, this part. And what kind of challenges did you face in this second phase? So did you see, let's say, anything on top, obviously the improvements that you have seen, but I believe that as usual, you have like some highlight, but also some low light sometimes when you deal with these things.
Yeah, there were two things actually. So the first thing is, of course, like when you had these teams with much more autonomy that were building this end-to-end, let's say, web servers, they were also able to touch more part of the front-end stack, right? So, and now this let's say more, let's say, platform work, or like the developer experience work, is more centralized. So some people started to complain that they wanted to do also this work and they couldn't anymore, right? So so that was a challenge. We partially alleviated it, that of course, because it was an internal framework, it was also easy to do some kind of like like internal open sourcing. So people that were very interested, they could still contribute to the framework. Also in the end, what happened is that some people actually joined the platform team. But that was something, right? Some people said, oh, it looks a bit more like simple, or like less interesting to work in this domain. But of course, like it's like always a different set of trade-offs. And I think the second one, and I think I like that you also mentioned this a lot when you talk about this, like it was also a big, not only just this architectural changes, it was a big organizational change. How do people now collaborate? Because so I didn't mention this, but before, of course, it was all these distributed front-end servers, which were actually separate repositories. Now we took the bold move to put everything in a mono repository, right? So we have this framework part, but then all these renderers are kind of like individual, let's say, packages inside this mono repository. And then there are a lot of questions. How does this work? Like, how do we collaborate cross team in these things? Like, so there were a lot of like also a lot of work that we had to do on something that we call the cross team collaboration model. So I think that was the thing that I think up until even the end, like there were still some questions about, I mean, the same thing as with Micro-Frontend, I guess, but when is a component and when do we need to create this renderer? What's the boundary? Or also like how do these things communicate between one another, etc. And a lot of things we didn't have, let's say, clear, very nice answers at the beginning, but they came later, right? So it was also a challenge to sometimes say deliberately put things on hold and saying, okay, this is not we're not going to solve this right now. We have a solution for now, but it's not the optimal solution.
And out of curiosity, did you document all those decisions somewhere, like a wiki, wherever, like having a architecture decision record, something like that, a request for comment, something like that, for allowing everyone to discuss basically these decisions?
Yeah, I would say we didn't do it like super, let's say, religiously on all of them, but I think Zalando has this nice culture of like writing technical design documents. So I think there was a good track history of, let's say, a lot of these decisions, especially like recently when we worked on a better way for communication actually between these components. I think this we very well described, for example. So yeah, I think it's also very important because especially sometimes in like, let's say you fast forward a couple of years and people ask, oh, why is it like this, right? So I guess that's also what's behind your question.
And it's something that I highly encourage every time because spending time on documenting provide like a snapshot of what was happening and the main drivers for taking a decision that maybe in 6 months, a year time will be completely different, so we can discard it or challenge the decision. But at least you have something that everyone cannot say, oh yes, but I have a better idea, because maybe the driver for that specific decision are not the same for the other idea. So it's very important to capture that. I think it's cool. Now you have, let's fast forward today. So you have work in Zalando, you have the pleasure to build these new renders interface framework, and is great. So you have learned a lot. And what you are doing right now, because I've seen in your personal blog that you have a very interesting mental model that I would like to drill down now on how to think about micro-frontend.
Yeah, I mean, so in the end, I would not say it's not only about micro-frontend, but like what I observed, like actually with the work that I've done at Zalando, and then when I was also talking with other companies, I realized that, let's say, the front-end infrastructure, it's something that has been solved, but only at very big companies, and it's not super well shared, right? So I've talked to a lot of people at like Meta, Netflix, Google, Shopify, and they're, of course, after a certain stage, you have to do kind of like this kind of like transition that Zalando did as well with the platform mindset, right? So there's not, it's always different depending on the companies, of course, because all these things are super contextual. And you mentioned for us, we wanted to keep a certain set of properties to the system. But I really think there is a better way to ship after you reach, let's say, 20 front-end engineers. Or I don't know exactly where the number is, right? But what I realized is that, and then I see a lot of like smaller companies that are actually, they grew very fast. Of course, at the beginning, you also want to support the business. You're like, you don't know like then 1 month to the next. So you don't focus too much on the long-term, let's say, architecture, which is the right thing to do at the beginning. And then there is this transition. And then for us at Zalando, it took us a lot of years to get there, like, to be honest, like it was a very long journey. And I realized there is an opportunity to try to bring a bit this knowledge and to support companies that are ongoing this transition, right? So a company that found product market fit or like is like scaling massively after like an investment round. I think like usually it's like a good time to actually think about this. And very unlike, I think, in the cloud, where there's a lot of like no expertise and much more platform which are mature. I think the front end side is like, I think is a bit less mature in this sense. And I think we have a lot of content coming from you, but like it's not a lot of content, not a lot of expertise that is shared. And so that's kind of basically the very simple idea behind what I'm trying to do with the next step with Simple Frontend, is to try to bring actually this knowledge and to try to help these companies do this transition in a matter of months instead of years, right? So it's still like, it's not going to be something that you can do one day to the next. But if I can bring like the patterns that I know work, let's say the solutions that I know work, I think there's a lot of opportunity to help these companies.
Platform engineering is the next stage for Micro-Frontends, to be honest, because I work a lot in distributed systems. I would say is easily last 10 years, and especially now in AWS, I spoke with many large organizations for discussing backend, front end, event-driven architecture, stuff like that, and you start to see when friction arises. That usually is because there are some constraints that are not allowing the developers to really shine and start to do what they are meant to do. And so therefore they have to circumnavigate certain decisions or let's say virtual locks that were created by the platform team because maybe they didn't spend too much time. So definitely having a person like you that have experience in the trenches and tried successfully to build a platform engineering at scale for Micro-Frontends is definitely a skill that is extremely interesting in that. And so let's talk about the mental model that you have written in your blog post, because I think it was interesting, that part. Can you tell us a bit more how this came out and why you think is valuable for the community?
Yeah, so you mean about the one how to split your front-end application? Yeah. So actually, I was talking to a few companies, and this question came a lot. Like because they like, even for internal, let's say, portals, sometimes they have this like big application, and they don't even know what are the possibilities, like what they can do. And the thing I didn't really like is that when you start to look online, the thing that came up first usually is like the technologies.
Yeah.
And I think technology, no, but like we are super excited about technology. I'm like the first like guilty of doing that as well, because like, for example, I love module federation is like super neat, but I think it should not be the starting point, right? These are just tools. And I think that's what I wanted to bring with this. Like when for example, now I can share it when people ask this question, is that what is the goal from the business side, or like, let's say, what do you want to do? Like how do you see this page operate from your customers? And then starting from there, like how then also, like, I think this is one of the second question I ask in this split is like, how do you want your teams to collaborate? Like, do you want your teams to be more like sharing these dependencies or not? Like, and I think that's also important part, right? Because I think kind of the same mistake that we did is that the organizational aspect, they came a bit afterwards, where it's like, oh damn, like this is really affecting how we work. But I think we have to think about this like ahead of time, and then that's kind of like how the idea came up. And then I also wanted to do state of the art review, and that's why also I supported it with like GitHub examples, so that I have an end-to-end picture of like, okay, like these are the different ways, like how these different things could work.
You are nailing it, because the reality is something that I'm pitching all the time, that when you build any distributed system, not only Micro-Frontends, the design phase is essential. And usually, if there are companies thinking, oh yeah, we implement Micro-Frontends or microservices for solving a set of problems, and at the end, they are just look into the implementation details and not looking on the design phase, the organization structure, the engineering culture. I think is another part that very often they need to foster. You mentioned monorepo that has, let's say, different approaches for building the CI/CD, but at the end of the day, you want to have like a fast, reliable, and very often used CI/CD in order to deploy as much as possible in production. I think is essential that we start to invest time, because for me, it's not wasting time or spending time. It's like literally an investment that you do at the beginning for having a better outcome in a shorter amount of time. Because yes, maybe the start, it won't be immediate. You don't have a Micro-Frontend in a week time, but after a certain amount of time, that depends from the maturity of the people that are in the project, you might risk to have let's say a clear path that everyone follow, and then you start to smash micro-frontend after micro-frontend after micro-frontend. That is more or less the goal that you want to have. But if you have intentionality and not, as you mentioned before, an afterthought on organization or an afterthought on certain things, observability, for instance, is another one. I think the path to a great platform for micro-frontends is, let's say, very well nailed and very well clear for everyone.
No, I definitely agree, especially like on the fact that you spend more time at the beginning. It's like a bit like when you write tests, right? Like, why do you write tests? It's like to go faster. I mean, it's like similar concept, right? So if you really like pave the way as best as you can, or like intentionally as best as you can, then you can really roll out later. This is also what I've seen happen. And then I also like would double down on the fact that implementation sometimes is not the hardest, especially if you have brilliant engineers. No, but like if you really have brilliant engineers and they have the constraints, they have the requirements, they would usually nail it.
I fully agree with you. In fact, in my opinion, the implementation that, like how you use React inside the Mac front end, it's not different from how you would use React in a single page application or a server side render in Monolith. But the reality is the wrapper around that, the input and output that you need to think about, where is shipped. Is it shipped through client-side rendering, or is it shipped on server-side rendering? And what is the container of this server-side rendering in the case? How does it scale? Can I, let's say, cache it or not? So all these kind of things, I think, are becoming definitely more important than if you're using, I don't know, Redux over I don't know, any other library, Mobex or whatever it is. So I think it's very nice to hear the same perspective from you, honestly, Jeremy. And for you, what would be the future of the platform engineering for micro-frontends?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. But from what I've seen is really like, it's really about building this golden path for developers, right? So I was also talking with Aviron Mordo, like VP of engineering at Wix.com. And for them, it's not only on the front end, but they build this, let's say, platform engineering culture and platform engineering, let's say, even like, let's say, framework, where teams can really focus on delivering this business logic, right? So it's kind of like this thing where they basically abstracted all the horizontal dependencies or horizontal concerns, right? Like you mentioned, observability, maybe A/B testing, etc. And you provide really like this super fast lane to go from 0 to 1 with all they say the good default, right? Things are secure by default, things are observable by default, things are performance by default. And I think that's kind of like, for me, the next step is to find a way to build things that enable all these things to be done very fast with this, thanks to this platform. And I think the first stage is to nail probably like your developer experience on your guardrails, as you mentioned, and then slowly building this horizontal enablement. I think really like if you're able to build something that still like is fully, let's say, self-service and fully like teams are autonomous, etc., and they don't try to go around it, right? Because as you said, that's where you failed. But if you manage to build like this golden path, I think that's kind of like this next step. And I think that's kind of like, without bragging too much, that's what we had a bit at Zalando, and I think that was what I was very proud of, actually.
Thinking about that time, so early stage of micro-frontends, or even before the name micro-frontends came out, on top of Zalando, there was also Open Components that had a similar approach. They started having a small but very strong platform team. I interviewed Matteo, that is currently a colleague of mine in AWS, but before was working there, and they did an outstanding job, to be honest, on creating the platform for solving some of those problems, and still a framework that is used here and there. So I think there was the right intuition roughly 10 years ago on investing on this part. I would say that probably nowadays we take it lighter, this concept of platform engineer, but we need to emphasize this more as a community because it's an investment that is will make successful the creation of Micro-Frontends platform, I would say.
Yeah, and it's not about building, let's say, a full-blown framework that is like one size fits all. And I think that's also a challenge I have with the endeavor I started. I realized, oh, I cannot build something that people start to use now because it's so context dependent. But I think it's really about the mindset and the patterns first.
Let's ask the classic question that I usually ask to every guest. So if you have like, you're talking with a person, never seen Micro-Frontends or whatever, what would be free recommendation? Let's say in this case, we can say free recommendation on platform engineering for Micro-Frontends, that I think is very pertinent on this episode. What would be like the free things that you recommend to start with for building successful platform engineering for Micro-Frontends?
All right. I think the first thing is to really kind of like, it's a bit controversial, but maybe it's almost start with the hard part. So what I mean by platform or micro front end, I think sometimes, like, let's say you have a legacy system, or maybe you want to start with micro front end or with like the platform mindset, or like with, like, let's say something that provides this, let's say, new overarching things. I think you have to start with, let's say, this new way of doing things from the get-go. And I will try to explain a bit what I mean by that. I mean is that, for example, like if you're migrating to macro front-end, or like not migrating, but like creating a new structure, you have to, I think one thing that can be successful is to wrap the new way, like the old way, sorry, with the new way of doing things. And then it means that you already think about routing, for example, fallback mechanisms. And I think it's like, I think what also was in your talk from AWS Rehaven, this strangler fig pattern. I think that's also something that we did with interface framework, but I think I think it was made just before I joined, but this was one of the most brilliant design decision, was that interface framework was a superset of Tailor. So from the beginning, we were able to migrate a lot of almost all the pages already. So the migration was already done at the beginning. So I think that's kind of like one thing I would mention, like even for like platform, like try to already wrap everything into your platform, even though there's not a lot in your platform, but just everything by default is in your platform. And then slowly you can iterate from there. Then I think is that I would say, especially for platform, is that you have to, I mean, it's a bit like the classic, but you have to do this high impact, low effort first. And I think one thing that's very important, especially because, as you mentioned, this thing takes a bit of time, but then companies also, you need to earn trust of your organization, or of your organization. If you propose a 2-year project that doesn't bring any value before the end of these 2 years, you're basically like, it's not going to happen. So you have to basically like ship these things like this, let's say, maybe sometimes beginning they're like these quick wins, or like but slowly they will also bring like more and more impact, but you have to really build this trust and this momentum of the platform, right? So because a lot of it is like, it's also about people and about convincing that this is the right way forward. So for example, if you notice that, or maybe like the way you're not using like, let's say, type language, or like you are like, you are wasting a lot of time, I don't know, with like the same category of bugs that can be fixed with a linter, etc. So you start with that, and then you show the impact, right? So I think part of this thing about also like iterating on the things that bring a lot of value first is also, maybe my last advice is also to celebrate the win and to show the value to your organization, right? So because afterwards, like if you also want to continue on this, like, because you're a bit one step, let's say, sometimes further from the business, but you still have a lot of impact on the business down the line. But you still need to show, for example, I think at Meta they have this concept of like engineering time saved for efforts. I think it's also a great metric. I think so. Showing like, let's say, the impact of the work that you do over time and build momentum. I think it's like it's one of the main things. So I would say, start with the new platform first, start with the new mindset, like wrap everything around it, find your low-hanging fruits and really focus on them at the beginning, and start to deliver value, incremental value, and then celebrate your wins and build the momentum. That would be my top, my 3 advices.
I love it. I think you're spot on. I really like this approach. Okay, so we reached the end of the episode. We touched a lot of great topics, and we started to let's say unveiled or revealed the platform engineering topic that I think will be constant in this year and the following years in order to nail properly Micro-Frontends application. Jeremy, was an absolute pleasure having you. Everyone will learn a lot from your experience and what you have done so far before in Zalando and now in your own new journey as a company or freelance. So thank you very much for being here. I really love it, and I hope that you enjoy as well.
Yeah, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and see you to the next episode of Micro-Frontends in the Trenches.
This season of Micro-Frontends in the Trenches is brought to you by Vercel. To learn how Vercel can cut build times, boost developer velocity, and improve user experience with micro-frontends, visit vercel.com/micro-frontends.